everyone, my name's Emily. I'm part of the city's communications team, and I'm joined here today with our police chief, Darin Schindler. Today we're going to talk about a few different topics that we know are of interest to our community. And to kick us off, I just want to introduce Chief Schindler. He's been our chief for about 4 years now. He served at Ventura PD for nearly 30. And to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So born and raised in Ventura County, Oxnard. I joined the police department in Port Hueneme in 1989, worked there until 1995, and then I came to Ventura in 1995 as a lateral officer. So going on 36 years total of police experience in Ventura County. Probably the best place, I would say, in California to work as a police officer. Great support from the community, great staff, so I'm proud to be the chief.
So a little birdie told me that our new city manager, Bill Ayub, he and you go way back, maybe to the police academy or a little after that?
So Bill and I were reserve police officers, I believe 1989, and I got hired full-time. He was still in college, and I think it was one academy class ahead of him, but we both graduated the academies and worked together as police officers for a few years in Port Hueneme.
Any stories to tell?
I'll save those for the back scripts.
So you've been chief about 4 years now, over 4 years now. What were some of the main challenges you experienced in your first year, 2020?
Good question. I had a lot of challenges. So, like any chief or CEO of a company, you think, hey, when I have the opportunity to be in charge, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. You have a lot of ideas and plans. For me, I'd been here over 25 years at the time. I had some ideas. I became chief early 2020, and I think I started about a week after COVID hit this area. The pandemic really started to hit Ventura County. We started to go on lockdown, mask, closing beaches, closing public restaurants, businesses, etc. So that was a huge challenge right off the bat. Some of the ideas I had were put on hold, obviously. I had two real goals at that time. One is keep people safe from COVID, while trying to deal with the ongoing crime issues that you'll have in any city. But two, I think the morale of the department and the employees, it really affected them. Officers and staff went from the regular duties to, I had to put together a team to go out and patrol the beaches, for example, and tell people,
whole new thing that we'd never done before.
Tell people to get off the beach.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not typically what we do, and while some people understood it, there were many who didn't. Closing down restaurants and restaurants that refused to close, and getting calls about people having get-togethers at their house.
Right.
I mean, all these things were challenging.
In March, April, May, it was the first major challenge was COVID.
First one.
Following that pretty closely, we saw a major social justice movement nationwide. How did that affect us locally?
So a few months into COVID for us, I would say late summer, there was an incident that happened in Minneapolis that drew national attention. At first, I remember the first time I saw a video online and watched the incident from Minneapolis Police Department. I was, quite honestly, I was stunned. I was thinking to myself, why is this happening? Not knowing a lot about it, started to look into it, started to hear a lot of feedback, got a lot of questions from the community. So what we decided to do at that time was I needed to come out right away. Once I knew what was going on, it had happened, and talk about the Ventura Police Department and our philosophies, what guides us here. Quite honestly, people need reassurance in the city of Ventura and local communities. They wanted reassurance that what they saw across the country wasn't happening with their police.
Right, and couldn't happen here.
And it's not what we stand for. We stand for the sanctity of life and everybody being treated like a human being. So once we started talking about that, we realized we started seeing protests. We started seeing a little bit more of an uprising across the nation. Here in Ventura, I would say we fared much better than a lot of areas. Bigger metropolitan areas had many more problems. We had some protests ourselves. I had my whole command staff on a council meeting one night, and we did about a 3-hour presentation on what we, the Ventura Police Department, stand for. Talked about the different teams, the units that we have, what they do. Talked about our goals, and just started to talk about things that sometimes we took for granted. You know, we're the police, and we're here to protect you and serve, but we had to reassure people. Yeah. So out of that came some legislation in across the nation, but in California specifically. One of them that I'll touch on is RIPA, which is the Racial Identity Profiling Act. And what that does is it requires police officers in the state of California to document certain things whenever they detain somebody. Now,
And what is a detainment?
A detention could be a traffic stop. It could be an arrest. It could be you got called to the scene of a crime and you had a suspect description. You see the suspect leaving the scene and you stop and detain them to question them. That's a detention. So obviously some of the questions are what's the perceived race of the person? Why did you stop them? Did you search them? Stuff like that. Mm-hmm. There's about 25, 30 questions that the officer fills out after every single detention. At first, that was like, wow, this is going to be a big time consumer. It's going to take us 5-10 minutes to do that for every single detention. We're busy. How do we have time to do that? So talking with our staff about the value of that and finding out ways that we could make it easier for them using technology, which we did. So we have computer-aided dispatch. We've had it for years. When an officer has a call for service, all the information is in our dispatch, CAD we call it. And what they do is, if they have a detention, they'll typically have the person's name, maybe some information that's in the call. And when they clear the call, that information will blow over automatically into this RIPA report. And they just fill in what's not already there. So that cut the time down to from several minutes to 2 or 3 minutes.
And tracking all that information is in the name of transparency, so eventually we could share that with our community.
Correct. So RIPA, the way it was brought forth was it would go into effect for the biggest agencies first. Mm-hmm. So the first agency that started the RIPA was California Highway Patrol, statewide police agency. Then big agencies like Los Angeles Police, Los Angeles Sheriff, Sacramento, the bigger agency with thousands and thousands of employees. Ventura being a small to medium-sized agency, 2023 was the first year that we had to report, so it took a few years. Gave us some time to prepare where other agencies didn't have time. So today, I've read RIPA reports. Typically, Department of Justice for California will send out a document with stats from the RIPA across the state of California. And I noticed there was something missing, and that was context. Quite often, people are looking at the data, and that's all they're getting is data, and they have to kind of put 2 and 2 together to figure out what the data means.
Right.
So luckily, we had some time to prepare. I worked with my staff, and we decided we wanted to do a dashboard, and we wanted to release our own data before anybody else did. We wanted to tell a story with it, and by putting context to it. So I talked about something earlier, which is the policing in Ventura being very transitory at times. What we found through putting this data together was only about 47% of our detentions, meaning someone's arrested, maybe someone's given a citation, enforcement action, are Ventura residents.
So that means the other 53% are people who live somewhere else but are traveling through Ventura for some reason.
Correct. Yeah, 53%. We actually decided to put dots on a map so people can have a visual representation when they read this. The map of the United States, there's maps in almost every state. It really shows, it puts context to the amount of people coming through experiencing the Ventura Police Department, whether it be a citation, a traffic offense, or whatnot. And then we said, okay, with that data in hand, what kind of story can we tell about the Ventura Police Department? So one of the things we did with that data was we said, what's our demographics here in Ventura? And you can get that from a number of places. So we got the demographics, people who live in Ventura. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the demographics of the people that live in Ventura, and you look at the demographics of people that we have done a RIPA detention report on, it's pretty close. It's pretty closely aligned. Then we said, hey, we have a very transitory population. Let's look at maybe some of the other factors that aren't classically, taken into account. Homeless population, for example. Ventura has a pretty big homeless population, so we can get homeless data from the county. They do counts every year, and part of that includes demographic information. So we got demographic information from the homeless population. Using the two, we found out that there's a difference between the homeless population and the demographics of the city. A lot of similarities, but for example, certain races, certain genders are more prominent in the homeless population. For example, men. Many more men per capita in the homeless population in Ventura than there are people residing in the city of Ventura. Mm-hmm. Interesting. So we use data not only from the RIPA, but data from the county, data from our own sources to put context to some of the information. What I'll tell you without getting into detail is we published this dashboard about a month ago on our website. If you go to the VPD website, we have a tab about us, transparency. You can click on that. The dashboard is part interactive. You can see reports, you can see graphs, and then towards the end, there's an interactive page where you can actually manipulate some of the data to get fine-tuned. The map I talked about with the dots across the country is on there as well.
So what we encourage people to do for a little more information on this topic is to visit our website. Don't only look at the charts, but read through the narrative where
Correct.
We kind of explain what people are seeing. And then once you get to the bottom of that page, you'll see the interactive dashboard and you can kind of play around with the data a little bit.
Yeah, I think what I like to say about this is we're not perfect. We're humans. We make errors. But one of the ways that you become better is you take a look at yourself. You take a look at the past, look at the present, and look into the future. So we're using this. We're talking to our officers about it. For example, commanders are going to briefings. They're using the dashboard, and they're posing questions to officers. They're talking about things. We're getting ideas from our own staff as well as the community on how to not only report the data better so that the community gets their answers, questions answered, but so we can be better. We can serve the public better.
Right.
Yeah.
So transitioning a little bit, earlier this year, Ventura County's law enforcement leaders, including you, issued a joint statement outlining Ventura County as one of the safest large counties in California. While many large counties saw a rise in crime, Ventura County actually saw a decrease. Is that something that you can expand a little bit upon?
Sure. So Ventura itself has been decreasing. Its crime stats have been decreasing for the last number of years. The last 2 years, we actually had the lowest crime rate that we've had in 30 years, in 3 decades. I remember the early 90s, middle 90s, crime was about double what it is today, reported crime. That's when 3 strikes came into law, and I remember it was a different way of policing back then, quite honestly. In Ventura County, overall, very, very safe county when you look at the different counties, the 58 counties across California. The city of Ventura has historically, where our crime is usually causes issues, is property crime. We have a lot of property crime in Ventura.
And what is property crime?
So property crime could be your house getting broken into, your car getting broken into, your car getting stolen, shoplifts, larceny, that kind of thing. The kind of actions that fuel property crime a lot of times are narcotic related. So a lot of times people that have drug addictions will steal to support their habits. Mm-hmm. Ventura is unique in the county of Ventura in that we have a lot of transient population. And when I say transient, I'm not talking about a homeless community. I'm talking about people coming and going through the city of Ventura. As you know, we have the county government center here in our city, the jails in our city, the county hospital, county mental health, Department of Health Services. We have a lot of services that people from outside Ventura come into Ventura to use. We also see a lot of transient population, quite honestly, from the jail itself. When someone gets arrested, even in a different city, and booked into the Ventura County Jail, quite often when they're released right here in the city of Ventura. So we do have a lot of a transient population that some of the other cities don't have.
So when you talk about a transient population and having more people in Ventura during the day, do you know why our crime has decreased if we have more activity now?
Well,
or something you can maybe guess?
So that's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
There are people that study the ebbs and flows of crime. I'll tell you anecdotally from my experience, there's a couple reasons. One, technology has caused crime to take different forms today than it used to take.
As in it being online?
Yeah. So technology allows people to jump on a computer and victimize other people without having to step out of their houses quite often. About a decade ago, we had some legislative changes in California. You probably heard of Prop 47, Assembly Bill 109. In essence, what it did was it decriminalized some of our lower level drug offenses. For example, possession of drugs used to be a felony. Today it's a misdemeanor. Being under the influence of drugs was a 90-day in jail or a rehab offer. Quite often then people would choose rehab, and we'd often get positive results from people that did not want to go to jail. Prop 47 has changed that a little bit. I think today the drug offenders, the addiction issues that we saw a decade ago have gotten worse. Now, I'm not saying it's because of that only, but I think as your police chief, I would tell you I think that's contributed to it. Secondarily, thefts. Thefts across California range in hundreds of thousands of offenders each year. Prop 47 changed the threshold from a misdemeanor to a felony. Used to be $400 was the threshold for a misdemeanor to felony. Today it's $950.
So that doubled.
So it more than doubled.
Yeah.
So what happened was, quite honestly, the repercussions for committing thefts and drug offenses, the accountability, I think, has gone down quite a bit.
So with the accountability going down, do you see people just not reporting those types of crimes?
Yeah. So what I was going to say is I think the business owners, the community in general over the last decade has become a little bit cynical, so to speak. The reported crimes that we get for those kind of crimes, for larcenies especially, shoplifts, we don't get near the reports that we used to get. And I'll tell you, they're still happening, but we don't get them reported. Many businesses today think it's too much trouble to report it. If we make an arrest, they've now got to go to court, they've got to pursue prosecution. Some of the bigger businesses actually will have civil agreements. If they have somebody who's victimized the business several times and they detect them second, third, fourth time and call us or stop them on their own, they'll have a civil agreement so the person's banned from the business. And that's easier for them to do than it is to call the police and have a prosecution.
Well, so with the city of Ventura specifically, seeing its lowest crime rate in roughly 3 decades, why we often hear that the community feels as though crime has increased. They walk around town, they feel scared more so than they did 30 years ago. Why does that fear persist if on paper crime is down?
Sure. So I talk to the people in the community, I talk to business owners, everyday people, and one of the questions I ask is, do you think crime today is worse or better than it was a decade, 2 decades ago? It's interesting, the answers I get, and a lot of times it depends on if the person grew up here or not. Mm-hmm. Someone who grew up here will usually say they think it's worse. And I'll ask them why they think that. And it usually comes down to a couple issues. It's a perception issue. One is they can drive around, they can walk through the city of Ventura, and they see signs of vagrancy almost everywhere. We call that lower quality of life issues, people sleeping in public, maybe urinating in public, maybe intoxicated in public. Their low-level crimes are not victimizing for the most part. They're not committing felonies, but it makes people feel apprehensive. It makes them feel like nothing can be done to help people. It makes them feel like it is, it's unclean. If I talk to somebody that came to Ventura from outside, from a big city, for example, Los Angeles, they love it here. They think, the crime here is very low.
The city is clean.
It's relative to what they're used to. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that's not to make judgments about Los Angeles, but here in Ventura, relatively safe area. We talked about the county being safe, the city of Ventura being safe overall. A lot of it has to do with perspective. When I tell people, hey, did you know the last couple of years we had our lowest reported crime rate in 3 decades? They're usually pretty shocked. They don't believe that. Now, it's reported crime rate.
Right.
Now, one thing I want to touch on is the crime rate that we used to use to calculate crime in the city of Ventura recently changed across California. Used to use UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting. It only categorized the 8 categories of crime. 4 of them were violent, 4 of them were property related. Murder, robbery, sex crimes, thefts, stuff like that. Today, it's much different. It counts over 50 types of crimes. So crimes that we weren't counting a couple years ago, they occurred and we could get the numbers for them, but we didn't actually publish them and use them for our crime rate. We now do. So you get a much better picture today than you did a few years ago.
So if we tried to compare the 2022 crime rate to 2020, that wouldn't be an accurate comparison?
2022 would be accurate, 2024 would not.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is the first year, full year for 2023 and 2024 that we've used this new calculation. When you look at it, it looks like a lot more crime than we did report 5 years ago. It's because it now includes tons of crimes that occurred, were reported years ago, but never counted.
So crime hasn't increased, it's just being reported differently.
It's being reported differently.
To the state.
To the state. It even goes so far as to count crimes where there's no victims. For example, somebody commits a drug offense or a weapons offense, even if they don't victimize somebody, maybe they're not allowed to have weapons, for example. If we catch them with a weapon and make an arrest, that counts as a weapon offense, where in the past that was never calculated for our crime rate.
So before we kind of move past crime, I know that the issue of fentanyl being used in our city is kind of a hot topic right now. Is there anything that you want to mention on that topic before we move on? Do our officers carry Narcan? How do we kind of work to address that?
Yeah. So, I think I was a commander when we started carrying Narcan, so it was about almost 10 years ago. We saw an increase in drug overdose calls. That's a call where somebody's overdosed on drugs. Typically, it's a medical response, but we would respond as well. And we started to see more of the opiate abuse. Fentanyl is a different form of opiate. It's the drug of choice. A lot of times, the overdoses we go on today, it's fentanyl, whereas 5 years ago it was an opiate. So yes, all officers are issued Narcan. They individually have it. If they use it on a call for service, they let us know they used it. We'll give them another kit. We want all the officers that are responding to this call to have it.
So 100% of the time, if an officer is driving around town, they have Narcan in their vehicle?
Yes. Yeah. A patrol officer.
A patrol officer, yes.
Yeah. Anytime they use it, we replenish that. Quite honestly, we probably respond to, on average, at least one overdose call every day of the year. Unfortunately, for the city of Ventura, we usually encounter well over 100 deaths a year for overdoses.
That's a lot higher than I would have expected.
Yeah, I would say fentanyl accounts for many of the overdoses, but quite honestly, there is a problem with mixing drugs. So it could be fentanyl, methamphetamine, or some other drug on board. And sometimes it's hard to know exactly what the cause of death was when you get the toxicology, but usually fentanyl accounts for part of it.
Do we see any cases like that where someone thinks that they're buying cocaine, but it's actually laced with fentanyl?
Yes. So the issue of people taking one drug and being provided with another drug is a huge issue. Mm-hmm. Even so far as to someone getting a pill that they think might be, for example, Vicodin or a painkiller, mm-hmm. and it's laced with fentanyl. Quite often, those people overdose because it's the first time they've experienced a heavy drug like that. They're expecting one thing, not prepared for it, and they overdose, and quite often they pass away. People of all ages, kids, middle age, elderly, no one's exempt from it. Yeah.
Right. Is there anything that community members can do to kind of keep their families safe, or is this more something that we see from people who are living a vagrant lifestyle?
No, everybody. Anybody can be victimized. Anybody, drug addiction, alcohol addiction doesn't have any boundaries. It could be a professional, it could be a child, it could be an elderly person, as I mentioned. Anybody today can actually get something for fentanyl overdosing or an opiate overdose. The Narcan that you mentioned is available to the public. I would highly suggest that they have that on hand. It doesn't hurt if somebody overdoses on something and you're not sure what it is. You can use that kit. Mm-hmm. It won't hurt them if that's not what works. But it's something that I would say reaches. It's all across America. Yeah. Today, the taking of drugs is much more commonplace than it used to be, and I think it's partly because of the availability of it, and secondly, I think the issue that I talked about earlier, which is the accountability has gone away to a large degree.
It's a little more prevalent. So you mentioned earlier that people feel as though crime has increased because of visible quality of life issues, visible signs of vagrancy, people sleeping on the streets, that type of thing.
Correct.
From a police department perspective, we try to address vagrancy, whereas there's another issue of homelessness. Those homelessness and vagrancy present very different challenges. Can you talk about how the police department works to address vagrancy, or maybe kind of explain what the difference is?
Yeah. So when we talk about vagrancy, we're talking about behavior. It's behavior-based, not a status of being unhoused. We have many homeless in the city. California is an epidemic across the nation.
Right, and it's not illegal to be homeless.
It's not illegal. Unfortunately, we come in contact with a lot of people who are homeless, who are either committing crimes, maybe they have addiction problems. The vagrancy part of the homeless is what we typically deal with at the police department. Now, I will tell you, I have a patrol task force. It's a sergeant and 8 officers, and it's probably our most proactive team that works with outreach for the homeless community as well as dealing with vagrancy issues. They work quite a bit with the city. The city of Ventura has some outreach and homeless resources, the county of Ventura, social services, and I'm sure you can talk to our homeless team, in another interview.
So for those people who don't know what our patrol task force is, we call them PTF, a team of 9 officers. They are not regular patrol officers. They
Right.
kind of have the freedom to proactively address specific concerns around town. So instead of being called by a resident and being sent to a call for service, they can kind of drive around. They know different hot spots in the city,
Correct.
and they can proactively make different touch points throughout the day.
Quite often they'll start their day early in the morning and they'll hit the areas where they know people that are homeless like to stay overnight. Sometimes it's because of a complaint. Maybe someone's staying on someone's private property. They'll go out there. When they do encounter somebody that's homeless, our philosophy is assistance first whenever possible. So,
And what does assistance first look like? They're offering a case manager, they're offering a shelter.
Exactly. Case management, resources, social worker to intervene in and get them help, get them off the street. It might be a temporary shelter, it might be something more long-term. Sometimes the person that they're encountering has committed a crime. Now, if it's a low-level crime, a simple trespassing, that's much more easily to deal with. We have much more flexibility versus when they victimize another person. Mm-hmm. If they victimize another person, it's enforcement. We have to act on what we need to do, which is enforce and uphold the law. But in a lot of cases, we'll ask the officers, start with the assistance and see what kind of response you get. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes someone will take them up on it. Quite often what I hear from the officers who work in the street, especially the patrol task force, now they know almost everybody who's on the street.
They know people by name.
Yeah, they know them by name.
Yeah.
The community knows them, the homeless community knows them. They build a rapport, there's a lot of trust there. And maybe the 50th time they've encountered this person, 49 times they've offered assistance, something to help them, and they've been told no. It might be that 50th time that the person is hit rock bottom and is willing to take them up on the offer.
So whether or not they've encountered the same person 50 times, they always go assistance first?
Whenever we can, yeah. Now, we do have what we call serious habitual offenders. You've probably heard that a small portion of the population commits the majority of the crime. Mm-hmm. The homeless population today is much more complicated than it was when I was a young officer, for example. There are homeless individuals who are homeless because they're down on their luck. Maybe they lost their job. Maybe their family wasn't there to support them. Maybe they had an alcohol problem and they're homeless. They don't want to be on the street. They don't want to be living on the street. They want help. Those individuals, we see a much more positive response from when we offer assistance.
They want to take advantage of the services that are being offered.
Correct, yeah. As you know, the city of Ventura has a shelter, which is a great resource for us. But the other side of the equation is overcrowding of prisons and people that maybe should be in prison but that aren't. They've been let out into the community. They, quite often, convicted felons, tough to get a job. They're homeless. That crowd typically is not real receptive to assistance from authorities. Sometimes they don't want to follow rules. Sometimes they enjoy living where they're living and doing what they want to do.
Right.
That's the vagrancy we talk about. That's really the crux of a lot of the problems for us. Those individuals we have to take a hard stance with because we need to make it clear to them that your behavior, your illegal behavior, is not going to be tolerated here in the city of Ventura.
So you mentioned that the city's housing services division in the community development department works closely with our patrol task force to offer services. I do want to just do a quick plug for their website. They have a whole list of different nonprofits and county services where people who are interested in helping those who want help can find where people can do laundry, they can find food, they can get set up with a case manager, and they can get on that list for the shelter. So they're doing really great work. We're working to address vagrancy, which kind of goes hand in hand with addressing homelessness. So hopefully one day in the future we can get someone from that team in here, maybe you two together,
Sure.
to kind of talk about the whole scope of homelessness and vagrancy.
Sure, yeah.
Before we close out, I wanted to talk about a recent major success for the police department, being that we recently solved a 33-year-old cold case homicide.
You did.
A crime that was committed in 1991 was now solved in 2024. Can you give us a quick overview of what that looks like?
Sure. First of all, big shout out to the staff at the police department who worked on this, and all the credit goes to them. 1991, we had a young lady who was found deceased up in the hillside here, actually not too far, but behind City Hall, kind of up near where people think of the Cross area. Investigators at the time worked the investigation. The case went cold. There were no suspects. They had a general description of somebody who may have been picked her up. They had a vehicle description and a general description of the driver. But ultimately, the case went cold. 1991 was really the infancy of DNA. So they had the wherewithal to collect all the evidence they could, which subsequently resulted in DNA being the key to the case. But a couple years ago, some of our investigators and detectives were looking through some cold cases. They came across this. They knew recently there had been a really big case involving DNA, the Golden State Killer. I'm sure many people have heard about that. That offender actually struck here in Ventura as well in 1980. So they thought, hey, let's look and see if there's some DNA on this case that we can submit and try the same kind of investigation that they used on that case. So with the detectives, with the crime scene investigators combing through the evidence, they found some evidence that they felt might contain DNA from the 1991 homicide. They processed that evidence. We were able to obtain a grant for a private company to help us run some familial DNA, which is when you check for DNA through family DNA, you can oftentimes find descendants of that DNA match.
Different family tree websites?
Correct. And that's what they did. Ultimately, they identified a family. They identified two males that were likely the source of our offender DNA. One of the males was deceased. The other one their brothers lived on the East Coast. Utilizing the assistance from the DA's office and a grant that they have, they were able to go out there, interview the family, get more information. When they came back, they got a DNA sample. They were pretty convinced that the brother who was alive was not our suspect. He looked a little bit different, the color eyes, etc. So ultimately, they did identify the brother, the one that was deceased, as the suspect in our case. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1999, so he'll never be brought to justice. But the family of the victim, she had a sister, has a sister that's still alive. They worked with her a lot, walked her through the investigation, and ultimately when they told her that the killer of her sister was identified, it brought a lot of closure for her at least.
Yeah, I actually had the chance to talk to the victim's sister, and she kind of understands why the case went cold in 1991, but was so beyond thankful that we reopened the case and pursued it the way we did. And the way she put it was that every single thing had to fall in place perfectly, almost like luck, or we could say really good detective skills.
Yeah.
Everything had to fall in place just perfectly for us to get the result that we did. So I know she's just overjoyed that although, the killer is dead, she has some closure and her family has closure.
Yeah.
So that was a really big one for us. We actually did release kind of a storytelling video of that case just a few weeks ago. It now has, over 25,000 views on YouTube. So for our listeners or viewers who want to check that out a little further, feel free to find that on our website and on the city's YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Before we close out here, Chief, was there anything else you wanted to address?
I want to touch on the cold case that we just talked about. So if you ask me, it's hope, right? It's hope that
why we pursue cold cases.
The case is never closed until it's closed. A few years back, we created a website on our VPD website dedicated to cold cases. This was one of the cases that was on there. The video actually that you talked about lives on there now. We don't forget. And there's unfortunately there's way more victims, deceased individuals, missing individuals than we like to see, but they're on there. Please, if you're watching this, go to that website. You might have some information. You might know someone that has information. I'd love to be able to talk about solving more of these cold cases. Yeah,
so on that website, we have a photo of each victim, a little synopsis of their story, and then we also have a phone number, an email where residents can submit tips, either anonymously or kind of give us a call and run us through anything that they know.
Yes.
We'll always take tips, and those will, be followed up on.
They will, yeah.
So looking ahead a little bit, the X Games are coming to Ventura at the end of June. There's a few changes being made to the X Games this year that were not in effect last year. Anything safety related that you want to share with our community referencing that event?
Well, first and foremost, this year the X Games will not have parking on site. It's a big change.
No parking at all.
No parking on site at all. So if you went to the X Games last year or not, it's at our Ventura County Fairgrounds. Last year, parking was on site. They have a big parking lot in the front there. This year, that is going to be taken up by X Games. No parking. So this year, we're asking, as you know, traffic is always a big concern for these big events. We're asking people to find alternate modes of getting to the X Games. That could be shuttles. We're requiring more shuttles this year. It could be off-site parking. Off-site parking will be available at numerous locations in Ventura, the Pacific View Mall, our state beaches,
the government center.
I know it's going to be available off-site in some of the other local cities as well. The train's going to be making stops right across from the X Games. That's probably the biggest change. Is traffic will be impacted. It's 4 days long. Typically about 10 to 15,000 per day, which is a lot of people going to one place. Absent that, we kind of run it like a fair. We every year we police the fair. We have a command post. We'll have a commander, a couple supervisors, and a team of about 15 officers on site inside the event itself. We're contracted to perform security, basically, for the event. Off-site, we'll have a lot of traffic officers helping with the flow of traffic downtown and on the west end of town, facilitating people get in there safely.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Chief.
Thanks for having me.
For everyone listening and watching, please follow us on YouTube, find us on Apple Podcasts, visit our website, cityofventura.ca.gov/Ventura Voices.